Well, the hot news of the morning is that Terry Crews is awesome and Don Lemon made a fool of himself, but I guess it really just depends on who you ask, because a lot of people think Don Lemon was right and Terry Crews was wrong. But I think from a rational, good-natured, moralistic position, Terry Crews was right. Now, what are we talking about? Terry Crews tweeted something about, look, there are good white people, there are bad black people, there are good people and bad people of all types. And that's why he's going to work with people who are good for good things. He also talked about in the past that you can't let Black Lives Matter become Black Lives Better. He's been attacked for both of these tweets. And it's weird. His response was, if I issue a warning that, we shouldn't do certain things and he gets a backlash for it, how can you have checks and balances to make sure the extreme doesn't take over? He pointed out that there are elements of Black Lives Matter that think they're better, that they're overtly racial supremacist. Don Lemon argues with him. And the interesting thing is, when Terry Crews mentions black on black crime and violence in these communities, which we are seeing skyrocket in the face of Black Lives Matter, Don Lemon says, whoa, well, that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. And there it is. Black Lives Matter is not about general life or lives. It's specifically, according to Don Lemon at least, specifically about police brutality. Now, hey, to a certain degree, I'm fine with that. If you want to talk about police brutality, accountability, I'm totally down. We shouldn't have cops breaking the law, and I think basically everyone agrees, unless you are a crooked cop and you want to be able to get away with crimes. I think 99.9% of people agree we want cops to do a good job. And if they can do better, do better. Police reform is widely popular for most people, but just reform, not demonization, not demoralization. Well, here's the big problem. We do have an escalation in violence across this country in response to Black Lives Matter. And this creates serious problems when you have a viral video now of a man walking with his 6-year-old daughter, and for seemingly no reason, a guy reaches a gun out the window, shoots the man, and holding his daughter's hand. One of the most shocking videos I've ever seen. And I'm from Chicago. You know what that means. We call it Chirac. They say, must have been a gang hit or something that this guy got shot in New York City. I've read, and there's a lot of, so fact check me on this one. There's a lot of confirmation that needs to happen. But apparently this dad walking with his daughter was just visiting the city from somewhere else. It seems like they just wanted to randomly kill someone. Does this guy's life matter? Now, look, I understand you want to talk about police brutality and you want to deal with these issues and call for reform 100%. But the problem is, as Don Lemon reveals, I'm sorry, man, I'm just going to say it. They don't really care about black life in general. It's just a slogan. It's just a brand. It's a reference to in the single digits of people who have lost their lives in the last year due to police overreach or unaccountability. People who have been killed and the cops were never held accountable. I mean, look, I don't think anybody is happy about what happened to Breonna Taylor. We hear these stories. According to the Wall Street Journal, it was 9 unarmed black men, I believe, were killed by police last year. We don't want to stand for any of that. Nobody should, and we should speak up against it. But we got to have a serious sit down and discuss what the results of all of this protesting and rioting will be. You cannot excuse the vandalism, the destruction, the rioting. You can't do it. People lost their lives in these riots. David Dorn was going to check out a call. His buddy's pawn shop was getting looted. They killed him, man, for what, a TV? Now, that guy's life mattered. What about these people? Terry Crews, he brings this up. He talks about these issues, and that's why he's the man. Like, I'm sorry, his tweets are on point. He talks about real equality. He talks about working together to solve our problems. And the scary thing is, his point is proven. That there are certain people in the Black Lives Matter movement who think they're better. It's proven when he gets attacked for simply saying, let's all come together. I want you to think about this, right? What Terry Crews is saying, I want you to imagine this. Everybody holding hands, rocking back and forth, singing a song under a rainbow. That's his idealistic vision. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but he's talking about everyone coming together to end the violence and all this stuff. And then what happens? Someone like Don Lemon comes up and basically starts screaming, but what about these people? What about these people? Let me throw the Black Lives Matter argument from these leftists back in their own faces. They often say, why can't you say, like when you say all lives matter, they say, why can't you just say Black Lives Matter? The argument being black lives are in more need of help right now than other lives. But of course, all lives matter. That's their argument. that when you talk about the white people who have been killed by police unjustly, they say, but it's disproportionately black lives. I say, I completely agree. I totally get the math. This is something that's important for people to understand. There's a disproportionate amount of black people who are killed by police relative to their population size. You can get into arguments about why that is. That's fine. Go ahead and do it. The Wall Street Journal certainly has those arguments. And I'm not saying it's, look, I'm just giving you that point. There's a lot to break down there. But just for the sake of argument, let's take what they've said. And now let's move forward in support of Terry Crews' argument. It's very simple. You talk about Black Lives Matter, but it's actually the father in New York City who was gunned down. It's the children who are being killed in all this violence. These are the people who need help now. I understand you want to deal with police brutality, but you know what? There's a reason why Terry Crews is right. They use this comic where they show a house with a little tiny fire and then a house totally engulfed in flames. And they say, see, this explains it. Yes, we understand that white people and other races have a little bit of fire, but the first thing we got to do is put out the big fire, right? Okay. Well, now I want you to imagine a smoldering city, the whole thing just blown up. It's much, much worse. Police brutality in the black community is a problem, in my opinion, that needs to be dealt with. We need to make sure cops are held accountable. Now, if you want to have an argument about the severity and scale, then we need to start talking about general street crime and urban violence because it's on the rise. So let me just put it this way to the Black Lives Matter people who would tell Terry Crews he's wrong. If you're arguing that you putting out this one fire is the most pressing thing, but what's happening is the hose is spraying debris all over the place, which is damaging and starting more fire. I mean, that's a silly argument. But if your actions make things worse, then maybe we got to stop and have an assessment here. Because what's going on now? Let me show you some of these stories. As they call to defund the police, abolish the police, as cops are being charged with crimes they didn't commit. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Crime is skyrocketing. They're actually making the fire worse everywhere else. So it's like one step forward, two steps back. This is why it's important that we have people like Terry Crews call this out. 16 children have been shot, some killed in cities across the U.S. as violence spikes. In Atlanta, an 8-year-old girl was killed. 8-year-old girl by Black Lives Matter individuals out across the street from the Wendy's where the Rayshard Brooks protests were happening. At a certain point, you have to ask the question, are you causing more harm by what you're doing than good? I get the sentiment. I understand all that. But violence has been going up. More people have lost their lives in the rioting for Black Lives Matter than unarmed black people died last year, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, how does that make sense? More people dying. I don't get it. I don't. Check this out. Let's read this story. Terry Crews and Don Lemon clash in heated Black Lives Matter debate. They say the America's Got Talent host appeared on Monday night's show to discuss the backlash he's been receiving for his views on the movement, which have been heavily criticized. Sure, but they've also been heavily praised. You see how Newsweek chooses how to frame it. On Saturday, Crews tweeted, "Are all white people bad? No. Are all black people good? No. Knowing this reality, I stand on my decision to unite with good people no matter the race, creed, or ideology. Given the number of threats against this decision, I also decide to die on this hill." My man, dude, Terry Crews is awesome. Absolutely awesome. Addressing his stance, Lemon asked why it was so important to die on this hill. Now, I do want to make one important point. A lot of people, I'm no fan of Don Lemon. Okay, I am the opposite of whatever a fan of would be. I don't want to say I'm a hater, but I'm not a fan of this guy. That being said, you got to understand that journalists often try to poke and prod and challenge an individual. It doesn't necessarily mean that Don Lemon disagrees with Terry Crews, though I think he does because he's an opinion guy. But I just want to make sure that's clear. You can often hear journalists ask challenging questions. It doesn't mean they support those positions. It means I want you to answer for these things that critics have brought up. That being said, I don't like Don Lemon. So Crews responded to Don Lemon. There's some very militant type forces in Black Lives Matter, and what I was issuing was a warning. I've been part of different groups, and you see how extremes can go really far and go wild. When a warning is seen as detrimental to the movement, how can you ever have checks and balances? You know, the reality of life is that when you recognize your faults, you make yourself stronger. If you can reflect and say, here's our weak points, here's what's damaging us, you will make yourself stronger. Terry Crews pointing this out should improve the effectiveness of Black Lives Matter, unless the elements within this group are manipulating it for violent and destructive ends. If they go around claiming that Black Lives Matter And then Terry Crews says, what about these communities? What about these these kids? What about these people who've lost their lives? And they attack him for it. The mask is slipping. They don't actually care about the life. They care about the cause. They care about their political ideology. If you are seeing an increase in crime due to the ongoing unrest, certainly that's not solving the problem. Certainly you are contributing to the problem you claim to want to solve. If you refuse to address that issue, I do not believe you actually want to solve that problem. He went on to criticize Black Lives Matter leaders for saying they will burn it down if they don't get their demands, and expressed frustration at how his desire to work with white people has been criticized. Black people wanting to work with other races are being viewed as sellouts. They're being called, I'm not going to say that. Sorry. You start to understand you're actually being controlled. Terry Crews is pointing out. I mean, even Snoop Dogg basically posted a bunch of racial slurs. They are. So they call people like Terry Crews names when he really does believe in justice and equality. He says, the Black Lives Matter movement has gained momentum. They say the Black Lives Matter movement has gained momentum following, a number of high-profile deaths. This we understand, the George Floyd protests. Crews spoke about the Black Lives Matter movement and how he thinks the leaders view themselves as better, echoing his earlier tweets last month. Lemon interjected, saying it's easy to paint movements as extreme, citing Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I don't want to move from one oppressor to the next, Crews said. He also touched on black violence and said there are neighborhoods held hostage by people who are literally running them with violence and then claiming that Black Lives Matter. Lemon questioned Crews on what his point black on black violence has to do with equality, and explained that Black Lives Matter focuses on police brutality and systemic racism. So why call it Black Lives Matter? Why not call it End Police Brutality or Police Accountability or the Reform the Police movement? If you have black people dying because of the unrest, communities being destroyed, businesses being burned down, then what do you really mean by that phrase? It's popular branding. That's what it is. And I'm sorry, man. I'm with Terry Crews on this one. Do you remember what happened to that dude in Minneapolis? He had the sports bar. It was his dream. He's a firefighter, upstanding member of the community, family man, everything that a good person strives to be. A firefighter. And that's what I'm specifically referring to. Someone helping others, risking their lives to be a hero. He saved up money. He opened a business. Before he could open it, COVID happened and he wasn't able to have his grand opening. Then the riots started and they destroyed everything and burned the building to the ground. I can only imagine what's going through this guy's mind. Now, mind you, I think he raised over like $1 million from people who wanted to see him have his dream fulfilled because he was an innocent victim. But many other people in these communities lost their businesses and will never see them recover. When these riots happen, people leave. The economy of the area halts. Businesses are destroyed. They never come back. Jobs never come back. And they were already ravaged by COVID. What about all those lives? I understand you mean that they're like, you're talking about death and destruction. What about their just livelihoods? What about their dreams, their goals, their aspirations? I can talk about all of the people who have been literally killed because of the riots. And I think we're now like nearing 20 or so people with all these kids in the unrest. You could say it's all the increase in violence and crime. You can say it's all interrelated. The police aren't responding to calls in some instances. They're demoralized. They're worried about being arrested. All of this is a direct result of people claiming they care about life. But not only have several dozen people literally lost their lives, they are dead, including an 8-year-old girl just the other day. People's livelihoods, their dreams, their goals have also been crushed in the violence. This is why I am, for the most part, a reformist. I think that we have conversations and we pass bills, we make demands. Peaceful protest works. It really does. And they don't want you to believe it because you can't have you can't have a revolution without your violence. You can't overthrow the police, abolish them, or do these things without some kind of overt violent action against the state. And the state needs to be handicapped by some kind of bigger movement. But you absolutely do get reform through peaceful protest. Civil disobedience, it is a fact. 100% we have seen the data. It gives you positive press coverage. It makes your cause the mainstream topic of the week or whatever. And if you keep doing it, keep engaging in this kind of protest, eventually politicians respond. Because like I said, people like Cuomo in New York, right? They look out the window. What do they see? They see a bunch of people with signs yelling, and that's it. Do they see any conservatives, any moderates? Nope. So he says, okay, These are the activists. These are the active people. I need them to vote for me, to tell their friends to vote for me. Everyone else will vote on simple policy or wedge issues. So they cater to it. That's why peaceful protest works. You also have cancel culture. Let's be real. As much as we don't like it, cancel culture is peaceful. It really is. When far leftists send, 50,000 emails to Facebook saying ban someone, that's not a good example, but like Chase Bank or something, and the bank does it, yeah, that's called a mail-in campaign. It's a long-standing tactic used by typically left-wing groups to get their way. It works. That's why I've talked about how the Republicans, they don't do this. They need to understand why they lose these cultural battles. Because the left knows the power of peaceful and disruptive actions. Calling, so Hulu, I remember this a while ago. Hulu put out a tweet saying something about Halloween costumes and got slammed on Twitter by conservatives and moderates saying this is ridiculous, and Hulu deleted it, I guess. I think they did. That's a peaceful protest, right? Now the left will say you're harassing people. Because they're trying to defend themselves. They're trying to make sure only they can use these tactics. But if every conservative had an email campaign, and this is a peaceful tactic towards getting what you want in a cultural battle, they'd win, hands down. Unfortunately, I think most people don't care, and the far left is active, organized, bored, and many of them don't have jobs. So they win on these fronts. Peaceful protests work. When someone goes on Twitter and even lying, they're not using violence, they're just deceptive. I disagree with it. I think it's wrong, but they're not engaging in violence to get what they want when they send an email to someone saying, fire this person. That stuff works. And that's where Republicans and conservatives have a major disadvantage, because they don't do this. They don't even show up for the most part and go out and protest, though they've started to. The real issue is coordinated activist campaigns. The left has all of the organizers, the youthful exuberance and zealotry. The right does not. The right has become comfortable and complacent for a very, very long time because we're in a very wealthy country, and they recognize that. And so they don't go out and actually speak up, and the left becomes emboldened. Don Lemon basically tells Terry Crews that if you want to talk about violence and the loss of life, start a movement to do it, because that's not what Black Lives Matter is. And to many people, it was kind of shocking to actually hear Don Lemon say Black Lives Matter is not about saving Black lives in general. It's about addressing police brutality. I think right away, a lot of people on the right take that to a darker place than it needs to be. I think you can say the movement was referencing police brutality, but I also think it's interesting to say that it's actually just a slogan that doesn't really mean what it's supposed to say. It was a reference to the lives taken by police and no one else. So as violence begins to sweep the country, crime skyrockets in the wake of the calls to defund the police, abolish the police. I have to question if they really care about lives, or if the real issue is their ideology. They don't like cops. I mean, look, clearly we need police. You can't have no police. People are dying because of it. That makes me feel like we need someone like Terry Crews to continue speaking up the way he is. Otherwise, we will end up with more people losing their lives. I don't care what you call it. I don't care where you stand. I don't care what your sign says. I care if you care about peaceful civil discourse, fixing our problems, saving lives. This includes holding police accountable for wrongdoing. 100% it does. However, I want to make sure we don't see a little girl die like what we just saw in Atlanta, or a 16-year-old kid joyriding in an SUV and the guys in the Chaz in Seattle shot them all up. I want these people to live. I want to make sure they're protected and they have full access to their unalienable rights. I want to make sure they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the same as literally everyone else. That no matter what your creed, your color, where you come from, whatever, we have these rights. They exist. But if you have people who are advocating for a system that will result in oppression, I can't support that. They will claim they're the ones fighting against oppression. But let me just tell you, we saw it in St. Louis. You probably saw this story. I did a video about it. Protesters first showed up to the house of the McCloskeys. They were going onto the private community to protest the mayor. The McCloskeys came out with guns to defend their property. Maybe it was over the top. You can have that argument. Fine. But the point is they came back. The protesters came back to protest in front of their house for about 15 or so minutes. This time, the windows were boarded up and there was private security. And therein lies the serious trouble I see in going down the Don Lemon route as opposed to the Terry Crews route. When Terry Crews says we must make sure we're, holding, we're treating people fairly and it's not a supremacy thing and all that stuff. Listen, when you abolish the police, you end up with the rich people having private security. They will be fine. It is the poor people who will suffer when you take away their public services. And that's exactly what we've seen in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, with shootings on the rise. This is why it's so important to make sure that your movement isn't doing more harm than good. And if it is doing more harm, and as of right now, I believe it truly is, then what do we do? I understand the core message. I think the core message is fine. The end result has been chaotic. There's been fires, looting, people's businesses destroyed. These families will be held back for decades. Literally, people are dying because of this, including a little girl. At a certain point, we need to say, stop this stuff, okay, and reassess. It's a destructive force. I think Terry Crews' version of Black Lives Matter is the right approach. We need to make sure that no matter what actions we take, no matter what words we say, the result is saving lives, protecting these communities, and truly fighting for equality for everybody instead of rioting, violence, shootings, armed groups taking over parking lots and things like that. And I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.